I think being a mother, we are so blessed to be able to be the memory keeper of our children, to be the ones that shape their core experiences. And I'm very intentional about that. I don't want to leave their memories to chance. I want to be very mindful about that. I want to be very mindful about how they reflect back on their childhood and what it felt like for them. And that's something that no one did for me. And I don't have that. And so while I'm giving them, I'm going to cry. So as I'm doing this for them, I'm doing it for me too.
Welcome to Travel Love Legacy, a podcast that highlights and celebrates the experiences of Black and Brown families who use travel as a means to create and build legacy. Hear the stories of Black and Brown parents who are building a nest egg of long-lasting memories, resiliency, and worldly perspectives for their young ones. I'm Melanie, the host and creator, the Trinidadian Canadian mother of a pink-obsessed and awe-inspiring princess. Travel Love Legacy is a collection of stories that serves to inspire those who are yet to take the leap, so together we can leave behind a world filled of Black and Brown global citizens.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Travel Love Legacy. Our next guest is Tash Haynes. Tasha is the powerhouse behind photography duo Ike and Tash. With 2 decades of youth development experience and a master's in public action, Tasha is a leader, mentor, advocate for community connection, and simply an undeniable storyteller. When she's not capturing life's moments or inspiring others through speaking and coaching, she's indulging in her passion for family travel, embracing the opportunity to show her kids the world, while celebrating cultural heritage and the richness of Black history and culture. Join us as Tasha shares insights on family, motherhood, joy of travel, and what it means to create and leave behind stories that uplift and inspire. I began my chat with Tasha asking her to take us back to her early childhood experiences and the role that travel had in her life at that point.
Baby, I have none. I have no early childhood experiences traveling. I did not get on my first plane until I was 21 years old. So I did not leave my zip code very often. I grew up in foster care and aged out. So I was raised in someone else's family. And the woman who raised me, she was 51 years old when I was born. So she had raised all her kids. Her youngest was 27 when I was born. So there was no like travel. She's raising somebody else's baby. That was not a part of her plan. That was not something she wanted to do. And so I just did not grow up seeing a lot of things outside of just like this radius of my home. And I live in Tacoma, which is like 40 minutes from Seattle. And even over the course of 18 years, I can count on one hand how many times I visited Seattle, which is like in my backyard. I just never, it was like this big city that I heard about that I never experienced until I was old enough to go myself, which was when I learned how to drive, which was late in life. I was like a late driver, like 20 years old, learning how to drive. So I just don't have any early childhood travel experiences. I didn't camp. I didn't go on road trips. I didn't do any of that stuff. That wasn't a part of my upbringing.
We continued the journey by asking Tasha what her travel experiences were as an adult.
Yeah, so when I graduated from high school, I decided to leave the state and go to college. I didn't go too far. I went a couple hours south down to Portland, Oregon, and I went to this small liberal arts Christian school. And they did these travel abroad programs. So they had 2 specific ones. One was Pacific Rim, where you would live in China and travel all over kind of Asia. And then they had one called Vienna Studies, and you would live in Vienna and you'd be able to travel Western Europe. And so I did everything that I could to be accepted into that program with really no plan, because it's not like I had parents that were going to like be paying for me to go on this trip. But I was like, if I get in this program, I will take out a student loan, I'll take out a credit card, do whatever I can just to experience this. Because for me, I saw it as a gateway to explore the world in like safety. Like I'd be with my school, I'd have some friends who would go, and I would be taken care of, like I would be guided, but I would still have the freedom to explore. And so I ended up getting into that program, and I worked my little butt off, and I took out my first credit card for that trip. And I still have that credit card to this day, 20 years later. And I went, my first flight was from Seattle to Oklahoma. That's where the main campus of my college was. And then from Oklahoma to London. And I spent 6 weeks away from home, living in Vienna and traveling Western Europe.
I then asked Tasha, what was it like, your first time experience abroad in Europe? This is what she had to say.
So my memories of that trip weren't actually great. I went to a school that was predominantly white. I was the only person of color on that trip. I felt really isolated and really lonely on that trip. And this was early 2000s. So I was there in the summer of 2003. We were getting ready to go to war. Bush was president. It was like really interesting climate in Europe, and like the United States was not, people were not excited about Americans. So I'm in this country, or I'm in these countries where people like are protesting Americans and can't stand us. And I'm a Black girl. And when I meet people, they think I'm from Africa, but then they find out I'm American and they don't know what to do with me. It was just such a weird, and I had never been anywhere before. And I just remember feeling super overwhelmed. I remember feeling very, very broke. I remember I ate a lot of Nutella and croissants, but also falling in love with the history of places, falling in love with the culture of places. And I remember being with this group of girls. There were probably 10 of us. And all these girls were like partying and shopping. And I couldn't do any of those things because I didn't have any money. And I was like going to the free museums and going to the places that I had read about in history books. And I thought that I would be jealous or feel weird about that, but it filled me up so much. And I think that summer that I was in Europe, visiting the Colosseum and climbing the Tower of Pisa and walking the streets of Venice, I realized how much I love history, how much I love culture, how much I love like visiting places that I had only seen in books. Like I loved my world being expanded. And so when I came back, I didn't travel for many years after that because I was, a young adult and trying to find my way. But that trip I realized was like a cornerstone of my life. It was a pillar in my life that helped me realize that how much I valued travel, how much I valued learning from travel. And that was like the beginning of it. I always knew that I wanted to travel, and I always knew that it was going to be a priority for me. I just didn't know when or how I would start again. But that trip was monumental in helping me to figure out what my core values were for my life. And travel is definitely one of them.
We then moved on to Tasha and Ike getting married and then having a family. I asked her to recount how her family travels started.
So my husband and I, we had one daughter for a really long time. Our oldest daughter is 11, and then our next one came 6 years later. So we live on the West Coast, and all of our family lives on the East Coast. So we were spending a lot of time when we had money or when we had vacation time traveling to see family. And it was in 2017, I got really sick and almost died. And I guess I had my midlife crisis during that time. I was 34 and I was facing like a really scary diagnosis. And I was looking at my life and kind of asking myself if I was happy with how it was playing out. Was I feeling fulfilled? Was I chasing after the things that I wanted to chase after? And the answer was no to like all of those things. So I went back to the drawing board and I asked myself, like, What in my life am I pleased with and happy with, and what am I not, and what changes am I willing to make? And one of those things was like, we are taking our time and our money and we are going to see our family, which is wonderful, but they don't always come to see us. And we're prioritizing folks that are not necessarily prioritizing us. And because of that, we're not able to go and do things that we want to do and expand our horizons. And so right before that, my husband's best friend got married in Bermuda, and we had gone to Bermuda as a family. And that was like probably our first trip with our daughter, like our first international trip. And we loved it so much. And my husband and I, we are kind of the safe place for a lot of people in our lives. And so we've always had someone living with us. We always have our home open. And travel for us was the place where we could be as a family, just the three of us. Because when we were home, there was always someone in our space. And so I think it was like twofold. It was like when we traveled, we became a family unit. And it was where we got a chance to see what it was like to just be us. And then also, I think it was seeing how we move as a family. When we travel, I really enjoyed. And so in 2017, I told my husband, I'm like, look, I love your family. But, and it really is because, you know, I hadn't really fully come into like finding my family. I found my mom's family, but I hadn't found my dad's family yet. And I'm just like, bro, like, I love your family, but we need to put this money somewhere else. And so, that very next year, we planned our first big like international trip to Phuket, Thailand. It was a place that had been on my bucket list forever. I never thought I'd ever go. And I found tickets for $400 round trip. That was the good old days, pre-pandemic, when you could travel somewhere for like $2. It's a lot harder now. But yeah, we planned that trip and we went to Phuket. And then that flight got canceled. So we spent a little bit in Shanghai, which was really special. And that trip really shaped things for us. And after that trip, I was like, we're doing a trip a year for our family. Like our family deserves this for how hard we work. This is going to be something that we're going to do. And that's kind of where things started.
I then asked her to walk us through, to go down memory lane and describe some of the more memorable destinations that her family has been to.
I feel like every place I've gone is my favorite for different reasons. We most recently came back from Aruba just last month, and we had such an amazing time. We loved Aruba. I feel like it's a really great gateway into the Caribbean. If you have not been and you're kind of looking for a really family-friendly place, I think Aruba has done a really great job of creating a really wonderful family destination, especially families that have like small children. Like there's just so much to do. We really loved that. I've taken my kids to Paris and Greece and all those places. Most people have like Santorini on their list, their bucket list, or they have Paris on their bucket list. And so those are really special places too. I am from the West Indies. My dad is Haitian, and so I love the Caribbean, and so I'm going to always lean into the Caribbean. But I just feel like I've loved everywhere. We went to Tulum. We spent Thanksgiving in Tulum in 2023, I think, or 2022. 2022. It was amazing. Yeah, as a family, we've been to probably like 10 places. We have so much more exploring to do, but I realize anywhere that I'm with my family is the best destination, you know? So I think that my kids would probably say their favorite place was Tulum. Like that trip was really special to them. I would say if I had to choose a place today, I would say Aruba was a really special trip. Our most recent trip was really good.
So at this point in the conversation, I really wanted to pick Tasha's brain and ask her about what are the considerations that she and Ike factor into their decisions on where to go and what to do. Here's what she had to say.
Well, first of all, I feel like there are places that people deem family friendly, and then there are places that people deem whatever. And I am similar to like the traveling child or mom trotter. I feel like wherever there are families, it's family friendly. And so I don't feel like there's any place where kids should not be. I just think that like kids have to be trained to be there, right? And so when I'm looking at travel destinations, I just feel like anywhere that there are families, my kids should go. So there's not like a specific place that I wouldn't take my family. But I do like to like consider how many things are there to do where my kids would be able to participate. And I think those are places that I think about, because there are places where you could go, but if it's a lot of adventure sports, like that's going to be a little bit harder when have two toddlers. They're not going to be able to do a lot of stuff, right? And so I'm always kind of thinking about what's a good mix of a family-friendly place, but also there are offerings for adults only so that we can go off and do our own thing and have a good time too. So I'm always looking for locations that mix like a little bit of both, where we can have like a relaxing time. We can have like family adventures where the kids get to participate in ecotourism, where they get to participate in volunteerism, where they get to participate in the things that make it special. I really, really, really love taking them places that are historic. They don't always appreciate that because they're so young right now. But I feel like one day they'll look back and they'll appreciate and be able to say, oh, I remember when our mom took us there. When we were in Tulum, we took them to Chichen Itza. And that's not like a place that like a toddler is going to ever choose to go. But one day when they learn about it, they're going to understand like how special that was. And we went through the whole ceremony and we got to learn about why it was so important to the Mayans. We learned about the Mayan calendar. Like they got all of that education. And I always think in the moments that those things don't matter. But then when my daughter, who's in 6th grade, is starting to get into some of this stuff, she's like, oh, I remember when we did that. I remember what that meant or why that was important. And I just feel like you can't put a price on that kind of education. So when I'm choosing a place, I look for the history, I look for the culture, I look for ways for us to be able to really get a sense of like why things are the way they are there. Like I want it to be an educational experience, but I want it to also be fun. So I look for a mix of both.
The conversation then moved on to Tasha's experience growing up in foster care. I can imagine that someone who's gone through the foster care system, that those experiences definitely have a lasting effect on other parts of your life. So I then asked Tasha, to what extent did she think that those years had an influence on the way that she travels with her family?
In foster care definitely has shaped so much of like my worldview and how I see things, and especially how I parent. And I feel like what I have noticed as I am mothering my kids is that what I have lacked is the memories. I just don't have a lot of memories. I don't have a lot of core memories. I don't have a lot of reflections of joy and of nurturing. And so when I think about travel, I think about how these are the things that my kids are going to look back to and remember. Like these are the memories that are going to shape who they are when they are walking through life. These are the reflections. These are the things that are going to be the building blocks that hold them up. This is the stuff they're going to come back to that's going to make them push forward towards their dreams or their goals. Like the conversations, the memories around the table. That's the stuff that nurtures us forward in life. And so when I think about travel, I think about how these are the building blocks for the foundation of their life. They're going to remember these experiences, and hopefully they'll work hard because they want to give these same kind of experience to their kids. Or if they don't have kids, they just want to have these same kind of opportunities in their life. And so that's kind of how I think about travel. Like, I think being a mother, we are so blessed to be able to be the memory keeper of our children, to be the ones that shape their core experiences. And I'm very intentional about that. I don't want to leave their memories to chance. I want to be very mindful about that. I want to be very mindful about how they reflect back on their childhood and what it felt like for them. And that's something that no one did for me. And I don't have that. And so while I'm giving them, I'm going to cry. So as I'm doing this for them, I'm doing it for me too.
So I then asked Tasha to talk to us about how she came to discovering her birth parents and what inspired her to want to uncover that part of her background.
It's really interesting because I remember growing up, I didn't really actually care. I don't know why I didn't care. Well, I always knew who my mom was. She's developmentally delayed though, but she was adopted. And so it wasn't really clear to me that she was adopted until I was much older. And I just kind of was like, I'm content in my life. I didn't really feel like I needed to know more. But then I think as I was getting ready to marry Ike, I just kind of got more curious about my family history and my story. Like when you're planning a wedding and you don't have anyone to invite, you're kind of just like, well, dang, I gotta have family out there somewhere. And so, what ended up happening is it was a couple months before my wedding, maybe like March or April of 2007. And my mom had this letter from who she called a brother, quote unquote. And my mom has a tendency to kind of get mixed up and to not always tell the truth about things. And so I'm just like, a brother, like I didn't believe her. But I ended up opening up the letter. And when I opened up the letter, my uncle had included a picture of his family. And it was the first time that I had seen people that looked like me. And I was just like, wait a minute, there might be something here. So I pursued kind of that. At the time, Facebook was fairly new. And I'd only been on Facebook for like 2 years, but everybody was on Facebook now because it was a new app that was not available to the public, that was newly available to the public. So I searched for the people in the picture and I found my eldest cousin. And I messaged her and I was like, hey, I think we might be cousins. Like, I know this is weird and coming out of the blue. And just for like a little bit of background, I also met my husband on the internet. I met him on MySpace 2 years earlier. And so I'm the kind of girl that will send a message and say, hey, I think, because I'd already had like a great result, right? I found like the love of my life. And so I wasn't scared to reach out because I know that you can make true connections on the internet and that it could be okay. And that was before like Match.com and Plenty of Fish and all of those things. So I messaged her and it was like maybe 6 hours later, she wrote back and she's like, oh my gosh, like we've heard of you. And we just like took the conversation to the phone. And I remember like shaking and just being like so overwhelmed. And by the next day, I was on the phone with like aunts and uncles and my mom's mom, my grandmother. And I ended up meeting them on my wedding day. My husband and I had planned my wedding in Myrtle Beach. It turns out my family's from Georgetown, South Carolina, which is 30 minutes from Myrtle Beach. We chose Myrtle Beach because that's where my husband's family vacations every year. So it was just easy to do a wedding in the middle of the vacation. And they ended up coming to my wedding on my wedding day. So I found my mom's family. Fast forward a couple years, when I got sick and I had this heart issue, everybody was asking about my family history. And I only knew one side. And so I didn't have that clarity. And there was even some speculation around whether my mother's family was actually her like real family. Like I knew that my grandmother was her mom, but there was like questions about whether she was a half sibling or a full sibling. So my uncle ended up taking an ancestry test and he had posted it on Facebook. And immediately I was like, this is the way that I can get this question answered. Because if he shows up on my test, that means, or the percentage of the amount that shows up, he will let me know. So I took the test and I did find out that he was my uncle. But I also found out that I had all of this like Spanish, Portuguese, French, Irish, Scottish ancestry that didn't make sense. Now, I know that like African Americans in the United States have other things in them besides, African descent because we're all mixed, but the percentages were pretty high. Like I'm like 25% European, which was really crazy to me and didn't make any sense. So, that was like a mystery. It was just like, okay, this is great. I remember my uncle seeing my results and going, wow, like you really make up the whole world, like blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, yes, that's great. But like how, like where's this coming from? Right. 2 years later, Ancestry, they had a new update to the test called Communities, where you could see where your family came to the United States and by way of which way they came in. And I found out that some of my most recent ancestors came to the US through Haiti, Jamaica, and Cuba. And I was like, what? So that kind of started the journey of finding my dad. I hired a genealogist who let me know that it's highly likely that my most recent ancestors on my paternal side were from the West Indies, specifically Haiti. That was 2019. So 2 years later after taking that test, in 2020, I went to Haiti with a fourth cousin. I didn't know how I was related to her, but she invited me to Haiti. So I went. I felt a spiritual connection to Haiti. I felt very much like this is home. Like this feels right. And then in the summer of 2022, my cousin who invited me to Haiti encouraged me to take 23andMe. And reluctantly, I did, because I've been doing this since 2017. It's like been 5 years. Like I've not gotten any closer to finding my father. And really, honestly, after meeting with the genealogist, I was under the impression that my dad probably was not even alive, because of the family members who were coming up were so significantly older than me by like 20 and 30 years. We figured that my dad may have been in his like 50s when he met my mom, and she was in her 20s. And so maybe he wouldn't even be living. Took the 23andMe test, and a first cousin matches. And that started like a whole journey. There's a lot of things that happened in between all of that. Like I could really get into this story, but by the next day I was on the phone with my dad. And then I flew to meet him a week later. We did a DNA test. I got the results another week later and found out that he was my father. I have this big, huge Haitian family now, and I'm the oldest daughter of 5 girls. So that's my story. So I went from having no family and being essentially an orphan to now having a foster family, a birth family, my mom's family, her adopted family, maternal mom's family, paternal family, and then the family that I made, and my husband's family, and then my chosen family. So I have so many families now that I can't keep up with them.
We then continued chatting about this multi-hyphenate professional that she is, with such an illustrious career background, from photography to youth development to community action. I mean, it looks like she does it all, the coaching and the speaking gigs. So I then asked Tasha how much of her career has influenced her perspectives on family travel.
I am a creative at heart. As you mentioned, like I'm a photographer. I've been a photographer for the last 16 years. I'm highly creative, and I'm very much inspired by creativity. So for me, travel is where I go for inspiration. So I'm traveling with my family because I want to give them experiences, but I'm also traveling for myself because I am invigorated by being in places and seeing things and taking in textures and colors and foods. Like all of that feeds my creativity. And so it's a huge part of how I function in my work. Everything that I do, I create from scratch. Everything that I do to make money comes out of me. It's not that someone is giving me an idea. They may be telling me what they're hoping from me, but I'm a professional storyteller. My job is to whether I'm working with brands as an influencer, it's to take their story and my story and weave them together to create something new. Or if I'm working with clients as a photographer, it's me seeing them and taking what I see and creating a story for them to share with their family or for whatever, or as a headshot to their business, like whatever. So everything that I do for work is creation. And so in order to create, I have to be inspired. And so for me, travel is key to that. Taking in new experiences and new environments, it just gets my creative juices flowing. It inspires me and it helps me to do my job better. And so even at home, like I have to have a very clean, beautiful space. It has to smell good. I have to have good sounds, or I can't even think straight. I can't even get to the place where I need to go to pull something out of myself to create. And I think that we don't give creatives enough credit for what they do because, and I've been thinking about this a lot, like everything that we do has been done before, but we are doing it in a new way, or we're doing it in our way through our eyes, from our perspective. And it takes a lot to pull that out of yourself to share with the world, you know? And so I do that every day in, day out. I have to like dig deep into myself and try to figure out a way to tell a story in a different way, or to create something in a way that is going to stop someone in their tracks and make them want to pay attention to what I'm saying. And that's a lot of work. So thank God for travel.
I think you can agree that Tasha's passion for family travel is truly palpable. So then I asked her to reflect on these experiences and let us know what impact she has seen her family trips have on her daughters.
Oh man, my kids are so flexible. They're so flexible. They roll with the punches. They're not easily inconvenienced or bothered. Like, they can take a nap anywhere. They don't have to sleep in their own beds. We don't have to live on a schedule because they just adjust. Sometimes that's great. Sometimes that's not great because they also like have no boundaries and like never want to go to sleep at night. They just like always are on, never want to turn off. They're also really adventurous around food, around experiences. My youngest two, especially my middle daughter, she's very extroverted and very inclusive. I've noticed that she's really great about bringing people in, going up to people. She's very confident. I think that all of my kids have some level of that. I think my oldest daughter is a little more reserved. She needs the situation to feel safe. She's going to like take things in before she leans in. But my middle one is she leads the charge. She's just like, will talk to anyone. She doesn't make there's no strangers. Like, everyone's a friend. And because my middle one is like that, my youngest one follows everything she does. So she's exactly the same way. So I've seen that in them. I've seen a level of confidence that they have that I did not have from having experiences and being around people and trying different things. They're able to speak up for themselves and articulate themselves in a way that I did not have and that I don't always see in like children their age. I think there's just that confidence around those experiences and being able to speak to them that really empowers them. And so I've seen my daughter, people will be like, where are you going next? You're going on vacation. And she'll like they'll ask her places that she's been and they won't believe her because it's not typical to see a little Black girl say that they've been to Santorini or Phuket. Like, it sounds like a fantasy, right? But she's just so like confident in who she is. And it's been really fun to watch her navigate those conversations where people kind of downplay her or don't think that she knows what she's talking about. Yeah, so that has been what I've seen. Like, the biggest impact that I've seen on them is they just have a confidence and a security that I feel like travel and the inconvenience of travel, like those things that they're just really easygoing and able to adjust and really confident in who they are. And I think that was developed through travel, things going wrong, things going right, being flexible, adjusting, watching how we navigate things when they don't go the way that they're supposed to, watching how we handle things, watching how we speak to people, how we interact with other cultures, how we interact in spaces that are not like ours, how we humble ourselves when we're places that are not like ours, and how we respect places that are different from ours. We've just learned how to be content in every situation. And we've, I think, modeled that really well for them. And so they have also learned how to do those things.
When it comes to teaching your kids about Black history and culture, Tasha really walks the talk. So I asked her how she has used travel in the past to teach her kids about these important topics.
In 2022, we did a partnership with Alaska Airlines, and we took our girls on the U.S. Civil Rights Trail. And that was really special. We flew into Little Rock, Arkansas, and then we went from Little Rock to Memphis. We did Birmingham, we did Selma, we did Montgomery, and then we finished our trip in Atlanta. And as we went along, we would study the place and we would talk about the history, and then we would go and visit the place. And what was really special about that trip is everywhere we went, there was somebody that was passing by who was familiar with what had taken place in that place or like had been there. And what really made it special is that they were all Black men. And what I loved is that we would be there and we would have like the story, but then we would hear in real time what it was like. So when we were at Little Rock Central High School, we met this young Black man who is a senior, who was a football player. And he talked about the pride of going there and what that school meant. He talked about segregation and how they instill pride in the students who are there, and how that school changed the course of education in America. And being there with my daughter at the time, who was 10, and hearing those stories, hearing the history of that place and showing her the pictures of back in the, Jim Crow era, and then meeting a student who went there and having her like kind of bring it back around modern day, it made it real for her. It didn't make it feel so historical. When we went to Selma, we crossed the bridge and I showed her the videos of Dr. King and them walking and marching from Selma to Montgomery. But when we got there, there was a man whose father marched with Dr. King. And so he gave the stories of like what happened that day. And it just made it real for her. It was just everywhere we went, there was somebody who had a real life account of how the actual thing had impacted their lives. So when we finished in Atlanta, and we chose Atlanta to finish because it's kind of like the Black Mecca, right? Like it's full of like Black success and celebrity and money and things like that. And when we were there, we were at Ebenezer Baptist Church where Dr. King had preached. And this guy came up to us and he was actually asking for money, but then he was talking and he looked at my daughter and he was like, Dr. King like loved you so much that here we go again, the waterworks. He loved you so much that he marched to change the future for you before he even knew you were coming. Like he put his life on the line so that you could have a better life. And he was telling her how important it was for her to see these sites and to understand what our ancestors went through and how much they loved us. They loved us so much that before we even got here, they were thinking about us. They wanted a better world for us. And that trip was huge for her. And it was huge for me because these are places that we've heard about our whole lives that live so big in our life and shape our upbringing. But like being there and seeing it and understanding that like Dr. King may have stood here, like, or these were places where it just made it so real. And it also helped me understand and reminded me that wasn't that long ago. The day that we crossed Selma, I was 39 years old. And I realized later that evening that Dr. King was also 39 years old. And when you think about being 39 and your life work being about bringing the world together, it's so young. It's such a short amount of time. Like it was only 19 years really of his life that he had, and he dedicated it so that we could live free, And so that was a really impactful trip for me. And I think for her, obviously kids were really little, so they'll probably never remember it. They'll have the pictures, but that was like a really big way that we use travel to learn about Black history and Black culture. But it also was a really beautiful way for us to also invite our audience in. And so while I'm sitting here and I'm telling you this story and I'm getting emotional, I'm crying, like in the moment, I am learning this stuff and we're driving the back roads at sundown to get from Birmingham to Selma and feeling a little anxious because it's still the Deep South, but it's in 2022 and not 1950, knowing that if we were stuck on that back road that we could potentially die. That was like very real. And it was really beautiful for us to have that experience and to understand what our parents have gone through. My mom was born in the early 50s, so she lived through that time period. and just getting context to the fact that like we are really so blessed with all the things that we experience and all the things that we've gone through. Like we really are so blessed to live at a time where those are not the things that we're tarrying through or that we're wrestling with. Like we really have a long way to go, but we really have come so far as well. You know, it's bittersweet. And it was at a time where we were just coming out of Black Lives Matter and all of those things. But it was really, really a really special time to do that right after like George Floyd and all of that stuff. So
I then asked Tasha for any words of advice that she would have for parents who want to use travel as a means to educate their children about Black history and culture.
I would just say do it. Like, I think sometimes we have a tendency to overlook what is available to us in our backyard. And so a lot of people will feel like, well, I can't do the U.S. Civil Rights tour. I don't have the money or I don't have the time, or I can't go to Africa because it's so far away. But there are so many beautiful experiences in our own backyard. Like if you want to educate your child on Black history, like go and look and see like what's available in your city, in your town, in your state. Like what kind of road trips can you do? Like what is the history around what happened in your area? As a creator, as an influencer, when things come up, you want to be mindful of how you share, but you want to share in a way that is also accurate and respectful. So during that time, I was like, well, what's the history? What's the Black history here in this area? What do I not know? Like, what can I learn? What buildings? Who were the players here? What were they doing during this time? And so I spent a lot of time doing research on, Jim Crow here. What did that look like? We didn't have a lot of the same things here in the Northwest as they did in the South. It was a little bit different. But there was still things happening here. And so I would say, don't delay, number one, and figure out how you can start with where you are and then branch out. Because I think we tend to forsake or kind of overlook our own areas and what they have to offer, our own backyards, the history that's there.
Thanks for listening to Travel Love Legacy. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Doing this really helps me to grow. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Travel Love Legacy. Till next episode, bye.